when we created CALT, David Langford and I, in 2004, started talking about creating an ag land trust. We had just been, I'm sorry, it was 2005, we had just been through the legislative session where we established the Texas Farm and Ranchlands Conservation Program. Kirby was involved in that, a number of you all were. And that was set up, it was a program that was created to fund the purchase of conservation easements on farms and ranches in Texas. And then the question came up, well, okay, then we've got the fund established, but we don't have a land trust whose sole mission is the conservation of working lands. And so we needed an agricultural land trust. So we brought together a steering committee. Ron served on it, Kirby served on it, a number of my board members served on it, and David Langford and I traveled to Montana where we met with the Partnership of Rangeland Trusts to see how they did business, and Chris was there, took a look at their models and said, yeah, we can do this in Texas. And so they were very instrumental in kind of mentoring our startup. They've also been able to utilize a robust source of state funding to purchase conservation easements in Colorado, and have done some analysis on the economic impact of that funding source. And with the Texas Farm and Ranchlands Conservation Program now being the subject of an interim charge and the opportunity to look at really funding that program, which I'll get into here in a little bit later, I thought it would be a good time to invite Chris to come talk about how it works in Colorado and see what can we extrapolate from their experience and make that work for us here in Texas. So I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Blair. Rose, you a fifth grader too. Mine was helping me put this together last night. She goes, Dad, you don't have enough like fades and like things with. I'm like, you gotta remember your audience. She's like, well, I'm used to like fifth graders. And I'm like, yeah. Well, this is a bunch of ranchers in Texas who they're probably not gonna be that impressed by that, but. She's like, well, this is just pretty pictures and cows and hay. I'm like, that's fine. That's what we're looking for. But I mean, Blair, this is, I was thinking it was 12 years ago when we had that meeting of LTA that was here in Austin, and there was a number of people who were in the room who were there, and the idea that Texas and now 7 other Western states would have functioning ranchland trust was at that point it was us in California and maybe Wyoming was going at that point. It was just a really just a cool thing to see this coming together. One of the things that sets Colorado apart. Yes, we were the innovators. We were set up to do this. And so this would all just be pretty. Colorado's really nice. You should come visit, spend all your money, and then don't stay. But the and I know a lot of you Texans do, and we appreciate that greatly. But one of the things I was talking about public funding, and something that we've really embraced is going out and seeking funding to purchase conservation easements. It is a game changer in terms of what you can accomplish as a land trust. There are some drawbacks. I'll touch on those, but in Colorado, when I started pulling this together, we don't do it with one tool, and you'll see we kind of have 3 to 4 layers of tools that we've ended up using, and it's been, I'll go through those, but it was kind of enlightening for me to be asked to put this together. This is not a presentation I've ever done before, so this is kind of fun, but you'll see we haven't, and there was no grand plan, this just sort of happened in Colorado. So another thing about us being pulling this presentation together, I'm usually bragging about how big Colorado is and all these acres, and I'm saying, oh, about in Texas. These guys aren't really going to be too impressed. So we're the 8th biggest state. We're second in the country in conservation acres for private land easements, and about almost a third of those are protected by the Cattlemen's Land Trust. There are somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 entities that can hold conservation easements in the state. Probably about 25 of them are truly active. A lot of those are local municipalities or local land trusts that have a really specific function. We're one of 3 groups that's working statewide, along with a generalist organization called Colorado Open Lands, and then the Nature Conservancy. We now have 277, or to 277 separate ranches, about 300 different easements. It's hard to explain because you'll see the tax credit in 40 counties. But I also realized when I put that together that I don't know how many hundreds of counties you have here in Texas. 200. Okay, so 40 counties. We only have 65, so we're active in about 2/3 of the counties in the state of Colorado. And a couple of things, and this gets to what Roel was hitting at, some of these things too, is that we have a little bit of a different situation in Colorado. We are half public land. And in a lot of ways, that makes my job easier because the land, you're talking about infilling in a lot of places where it's not the whole landscape could be converted. We have public land management issues that go along with that, but it makes it a little bit different. That 50% public land really focuses where development happens, though, and it's nobody builds up here. I mean, this is a little tough. Some of this stuff, the rock. I mean, most of the rock in Colorado is pretty well protected by federal ownership. But it focuses development in the river bottoms. It focuses where the water is, and it focuses where it's flat. And so there's immense pressure on when there's flat and water resources. That means agriculture. And it really is an inordinate amount of pressure on our ag lands for that development that's coming. Our population is much lower, but our growth rate is probably pretty similar to Texas in terms of overall growth rate. And then the interesting thing I noticed from your presentation is that we're in the same boat. We're 87% urban population. So we have a population that in a lot of ways is concentrated and in a lot of ways also doesn't understand what rural land is about and certainly doesn't understand what agriculture is about. Despite all how Denver may try to portray itself, we are a natural resource state. Tourism, recreation, agriculture, and minerals are the three top drivers of our economy. Tech is the fourth. But those three drive things. And so when we've talked to, and I keep hearing water, is it here? We're short on water too, but for some reason water doesn't resonate as much as tourism in Colorado. And we've really tried to focus a lot of our work in terms of justifying why we should be investing in open space as an economic issue. People are not coming to Colorado because they love our Walmarts or our roads or we have great shopping. They come because there are places like this, the places where they can go have an experience of having the counter calf come and visit you while they're fishing. It's my friend Mike. He's nice enough to be in the right place at the right time for this. One of the things that we did recently when some of our incentives came under attack during the recession was do an economic study and say, what are we getting in return? I have a copy of it here. I'd be happy to share it. Blair, I can email it to you and you can send it around to everybody as well. But we did an economic return just on ecosystem services. What's the value of the open space, the scenic views, to how does that, some of our local counties have looked at what a view is worth. This Routt County, which is Steamboat Springs, has done some really innovative things that people are willing to spend more money per tourism visit because of the ranching component of the landscape than in other communities, other ski area communities in Colorado. So they did this study and found out that every dollar invested in open space is returning somewhere between $6 and $7 per year to the local economy. It's pretty impressive and pretty compelling to local elected officials and those who are counting their pennies. Especially, we did that study in 2010. It was bleak. You guys remember, it was not a good time, and there were a lot of reasons that people were saying conservation is great and all, but we can't afford it right now. And that study really did help with our legislature in saying we can't afford not to in a lot of ways. And so that was something that for us, those two are tied in. One of the nicest things our governor said is that agriculture has been this kind of steady throughout. We have a boom and bust economy, but cattle and row crops have been this just steady part of our economy for 100 years. And the ag economy is what our governor kept saying. Ag brought us out of the recession. And it was the leading sector getting us out of that. And tech and mining have since come, and the tourists are coming back. And you guys from Texas are coming to visit us again. It's been nice. But the ag was the kind of the anchor of our economy, and it was really nice to kind of have that recognition finally. It's not terribly exciting to, but the governor, it was nice that the governor started to recognize that. So, in terms of public funding, we have four main legs of our funding in our funding portfolio. The first and probably the most influential was Great Outdoors Colorado, which was created through a constitutional amendment. We have the easiest constitution in the country to come amend. If you want to come do something like legalize marijuana, this is the place to come. We can do it. You can do whatever you want. It's really easy to amend our constitution. But in 1992, we did that to have all of our lottery proceeds fund open space conservation, parks, and local recreation projects. And that has invested an enormous amount, close to $1 billion over the last 25 years, or 20 years. Right now, it's putting about $15 to $20 million into a pot of money that can be accessed for agricultural land conservation. There's other programs they do. We don't compete with the local ball field or the swimming pool or that kind of thing. But for open space conservation, GOCO, which is what we call it, can provide somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 to $20 million on a competitive grant process. So that started in '92. In 2000, we were flush with money, and we have another constitutional amendment that prohibits the state from taking in revenue beyond a certain increase from the previous year's budget. So at that point, any money that the state would take in excess sales tax revenue or whatever it may be would have to be returned to the citizens. So for a few years, we were getting $200 and $300 and $400 checks back from the state every year when we filed our income tax, which was great. But the legislature was pretty savvy, actually, and decided that, well, they were the electeds. They could decide where some of this money could go. They instituted then a series of tax credits in the late 90s until 2001 or 2002 that were tax credits that could go towards offsetting somebody's personal income tax liability or business tax liabilities, including one for the donation of conservation easements. There were 13 of them that were introduced in that period of time. 12 of them are gone. We have the one that's left. And that was largely because of its effectiveness and then our ability to show that this was something that was economically important to the state. So in 2010, our governor came to us and said, here's your choice. We can cut the credit in half and put a cap on it, or we can eliminate your credit. Which would you like? And we had 3 days to decide. We took the deal, and so now we have a cap on this. But I think one of the things, this is a tool, I know you guys don't have income tax here in Texas, but this is a tool that has been amazingly effective. It applies to any property in the state that has a qualifying easement. It doesn't have to be ag land, it can be wetlands, it can be wildlife habitat, it can be whatever, but it's been kind of the great equalizer of conservation around the state. And the beauty of it is that it is a transferable credit. So a landowner who doesn't have income tax liability can sell that credit to somebody who does have income tax liability for about 80 to 85 cents on the dollar. Realizing cash in hand. It's not a deduction, this is a credit and a transferable credit, so it's basically a marketable commodity. Following mainly on GOCO's implementation, several of our counties implemented either sales tax or mill levies for open space conservation. Routt County, which is the Steamboat Springs community, was probably the one that is the most ag friendly. That community has basically wrapped a ski area in ranching, and that's their identity, and they've really taken that to heart. But there have been probably about a dozen counties that have done it, and several municipalities that have done it. More the municipalities are doing it for trails and local recreation projects, but all with the idea that they can then match the state money somehow and really achieve local goals. And that local funding, I was just back in the envelope, I'm guessing there's probably $30 million a year that's coming into conservation from just those local funding sources around the state. And I cut out the federal one. The interesting thing is that now there's this big chunk of federal money through the Farm Bill, and that was kind of an afterthought for us. It's come in, those federal monies require matching, and the state and local sources are great sources of matching, but we didn't set up our state systems to match federal money. We set up our state systems because they made sense, and the federal money has kind of been a nice add-on. So I'm going to hit on one family and how this actually works. So this is a guy of the G5 Ranch in Yampa, Colorado, right about 20 miles from Steamboat Springs. The guy in the middle, his name is Bobby George. He's my age. He's a single dad. Those are his 2 daughters he's raising on the ranch. And he's, depending on what day you're talking to, he's either 4th or 5th, and his daughters are either 5th or 6th generation. They have great family arguments while you're in the truck with them about how many generations it's been, and none of them know. But this is a guy who conservation would not have worked if you're looking at an income tax deduction on a donated easement only. It just simply would not have gotten there. And just talk a little bit about what they ended up doing. He's got a $5 million ranch, about 2,500 acre property along the upper reaches of the Yampa River. And the easement worth $2.8 million. And we were able, through the 4 tools, the NRCS federal money, Great Outdoors Colorado state lottery money, Routt County's local open space tax, and then the tax credit, which it's a little bit of a formula that I can bore you with if you really want to know, but it generated about $310,000 cash for him. So he ended up with a net for his conservation easement of $2.2 million from those 4 sources. And we oftentimes, when we're out talking with landowners, I'm sure Blair and you and others have this conversation too, you have to be wanting to do a conservation easement, 2 things need to work. The numbers need to pencil, and you need to want to see that place stay as a ranch. You probably have no limitation on people who want to see their places stay together. Getting the numbers to pencil, to truly pencil for somebody who's in agriculture. And for this family, for instance, the ranch is worth $5 million, their net assets might be 6 if you take their cattle and all their equipment and everything they own. But the land value is the overwhelming value of that family's net worth. They're not going to be able to give that away. It just doesn't make any economic sense for them to do it. So a transaction like this, they look at this and they say, this gives us a cash infusion. They can endow what he's doing is he's buying more land, and he's able to really expand. What he's trying to do is expand his operation where it's going to be big enough to support both of his kids and their families someday, more than the one family can support today. And so this might be a little hard to read, but if you look at the current, that $2.2 million compared to what he would get if he was just looking at the federal income tax donation. This ranch sometimes pays income tax, most of the time doesn't. I put in a $50,000 adjusted gross income figure in here. Most years they don't pay income tax. So it's pretty modest. I mean, obviously this number changes if you've got somebody with a big income, but a lot of traditional farmers and ranchers, I'm sure it's true in Texas, probably the ranch operation is not running a huge profit year over year. So he could realize just from the donation maybe $30,000 in tax savings. And with that expanded, there's a chance that we can get this expanded federal incentive back in place. Maybe he could realize $120,000 over 16 years. It's not a huge game-changing event for that family when you don't have a consistent stream of income over time. So all that's kind of rosy. The drawbacks are funded deals take a lot of work. They take a lot of time and energy and staff expertise. I can't hire somebody right off the street who even knows real estate to do a funded conservation easement right off the bat. Funders often have conflicting goals. They can conflict with your goals as a land trust. They can conflict with each other's goals. I've got a couple, I can't get USDA and Colorado Parks and Wildlife to be in the same deal because they have not enough in common to actually weave a deal together where they can protect a ranch. And so there are some of those. I think it's safe to say that there are strings that come with money, and some landowners don't like those strings. There are funders out there in the world that our land trust has decided we can't live with the strings, or we philosophically don't agree with. We're not willing, irrigated agriculture is big. We're not willing to allow somebody to say, you can take all the water off this and put it in the stream because it's good for the fish. We're an agricultural land trust. What's good for accomplishing our mission and serving our constituency is making sure that these hay meadows stay as hay meadows. And if we can figure out a way to do that and keep water in the stream, we're great, but we're not talking about putting water in the stream first and then maybe growing some hay in wet years. So there's some funding sources that we've walked away from because we just have philosophical differences on what we're trying to accomplish and how we're trying to preserve a future for agriculture. And I think I'm done. And this is a question for you guys, because Blair asked me to put this together, and I said, well, you guys don't have an income tax, and do you have a lottery? It's I don't know what it goes to, but it doesn't go to open space.
We don't know.
General revenue goes into the
So, I guess my question to you is, and I know Blair has explained to me that you're looking at some sort of state program, and how can you build it? And I think there's lessons to be learned, but my big message to you is it's going to have to be done on your way. And that's, I'm not telling people from Texas they have to do it their own way. That's probably what you're best at. But this is one of my favorite meetings I've ever had in my life, so I just like to have this. This was a good discussion about, this was a water meeting that we had one day, and it was an interesting meeting, but it was even a cooler picture, so I just decided to wander away from the meeting and take a picture of it. But that's all I've got, Blair, and I think hopefully this is for some discussion on what's possible, but I don't know where all you're going and what you're considering here, but.
Well, let me give my little presentation, which kind of lays out what we have in front of us.